Welcome to Interplay, Conversations in Music. This is your host, Michael Shapiro. Today, my wonderful guest is cellist Maya Beiser. So good to see you, Maya.
Wonderful to see you, Michael.
Thank you so much. You know, Maya, you have been dubbed so many different things, names, I should say, or descriptions in the press, which I have to mention them. I hope you don't blush too much. The reigning queen, the reigning queen of avant-garde cello, a force of nature, a license to kill instrument.
Uh,
What do you think of all that?
you can't pay too much attention to those things. Um, I mean, people come up with all kinds of descriptions. It's okay. I try not to. I try not to put too much weight into either praises or otherwise. I mean, if it's criticism, I usually do listen because I find that that's something that I can learn from. But praises, you don't really learn much from.
I agree. And also negative, I'm not sure what exists today because there's not much, there's not so much criticism anymore. Few papers
Really
have any of it.
No, no. There's very little. There's very little.
There's very little, and it's mostly feature articles these days or interviews. And I'm so glad to be interviewing and talking to you. I call this a conversation, not an interview. For so many years, you have created projects, let us say, which have been attached to multimedia events often. There's a great deal of video online. There's also, not only your website, mayabeiser.com, but also on YouTube and other platforms. Mm-hmm. You've done TED Talks with multi-images and sounds about 8-9 years ago of you playing cello live to yourself in many other iterations behind you. But there are also videos of you playing in nature, of you playing with orchestra, like the David Bowie symphonic works that Evan Ziperin arranged, or, you're playing with dancers. So you made a decision quite early on from my watching you all these years and listening, that it was not just Maya going to Tacoma to play the Elgar Concerto, but not that there's anything wrong with the Elgar Concerto, but you made a decision quite a number of years ago to go down a different path, not only with Bang on the Can All Stars, but which you helped found, but a lot of different things. So my question to you is, what has drawn you to this very, very varied life?
Let's see. How do I answer it in a succinct kind of way? Because it's a.
You don't need to be succinct.
There's a lot to say, but I mean, I think that I was born with a sense of a quest of a sort, and before we started the official interview, we spoke a little bit about our background, and maybe it would be good to give you a sense of what my background is, which is
Please.
such, and so I was born in a kibbutz in Israel, in the Galilee. It was a socialist kibbutz, very left-leaning. We were very much in connection with all the different Arab groups that surrounded our kibbutz. And my father, who was, get this, he was a gaucho, a Jewish gaucho from Argentina, who moved to Israel, became a socialist communist and moved to Israel to start this kibbutz with a group of Argentinian kids. They were literally kids when they started. His father came from Russia, from Ukraine. My great-grandfather was a rather famous writer and who lived with Tolstoy. And, so they came from and the other side of the family was lineage of rabbis, all escaped they all escaped Russia at the turn of the century and followed the Baron Hirsch, who bought pieces of lands in the middle of the Pampas in Argentina.
Yes, I know all
And
about them.
yeah, and brought these guys there and just kind of, and there were a bunch of Jews, intellectual Jews who knew nothing about land or anything, and they just started this this little commune there, um, and but very soon after, my father's sisters and all moved to Buenos Aires and started to study and became entrepreneurs or lawyers, and the kind of the typical Jewish story. My father was the only one who moved to Israel and started this kibbutz. And he met my mom because she was his French teacher. My mother's French, but my mother actually, her parents were both from Poland, from this little shtetl in Poland, both very religious. My grandfather, at the age of 18, rebelled and moved to Spain to fight against Franco. He was an anarchist. And my grandmother was a communist, also from a little shtetl. How did they even get those ideas? I don't know. But, I think it's just something that runs in our blood.
Oh, it
And
does.
and they went to, and she also went to fight. And they were really fighting against Franco and kind of against each other. But they met in Spain during the Civil War and fell in love and got married. And then when Franco went to power, they had to escape. They escaped through the Pyrenees and found themselves in Albi in France, where they sort of settled and where my mom was born. When my mom was 3, the Nazis occupied France, and this was the Vichy area. So my grandparents both became partisans, and they put my mom and her little sister, it was just half a year old, in a monastery.
Oh
And
boy.
she was raised by nuns. After the war, they got her back, and my mom ended up, when she was 18, meeting my father, and she had me when she was 21. So I came into this world in a very strange way. My mom just came to the kibbutz. It was a little Argentinian community,
Hmm.
and they were learning as they went.
Of course.
It was a pretty crazy experiment.
Yeah.
My mom came from the hospital and put me in a baby's house. And from there, I went to, children's house. I never actually slept with my parents. I would only meet my parents in the afternoons for a few hours. And I was a very sensitive kid. And so all I remember from my early years is kind of crying and not wanting to go back to the children's home. And
Oh my.
yeah, but the one interesting thing that happened was that my father had perfect pitch, and he sort of, we all the girls in the family were 4 girls. I was the oldest, but his dream was always to be a musician, which he never had the opportunity to learn.
Mm.
And so he had this record player at home, and those few hours in the afternoon every day that we would meet, that we actually got to spend together, um, the activity was listening to music. And so, and I spoke about it quite a bit. I did an album a few years ago that I called Trans Classical,
Mhm.
which was sort of about this first feeling that I had, that my first memory of what music meant to me, and how music was always connected in my psyche as something that is very transcendent and very beautiful and very peaceful, and also just kind of something that hugs you, because it was those moments were just so meaningful for me. And so of course I didn't, it wasn't an intellectualized kind of thing, because it was just very, very raw. It was pre-verbal even,
Mhm.
just that connection that I had to music. Um, and, you know, in the kibbutz, everybody started to play an instrument, which is sort of this wonderful thing because
Mm.
we happened to have a lot of people there who just, you know, there was this great piano teacher, a music teacher, and she just wanted everyone to play. And then they, you know, they tested everyone's hearing and they discovered that I had a very good, you know, sense of pitch. And so they suggested I play the violin. And I think, you know, there was as much as there were a lot of magical things in the kibbutz, but from the very moment that I remember thinking about it, I knew that this wasn't the place for me. And I think there was a lot of very traumatic experiences that I had, which really just had to do with the separation with my mother, from my mother, not being
Fascinating.
able to, you know, not being able to be with
Yeah.
her and my father. And so I knew it, and there was this rebellious streak that I had from the
Mm.
very beginning, which was I wanted to find something that was mine or that was really connected to me. So when they suggested a violin, you know, I said no, I want to play the cello, and I knew about
Before
the
you go further, I just want to say one thing. You say rebellious streak, which I find interesting because
yeah,
you're the eldest
yes,
of four daughters.
right,
You are the Leah, in essence,
the
the,
Leah,
the Leah,
exactly,
the
that's right,
oldest. And usually the Leah of the group is so-called not the one that
not the
is.
rebellious, I know.
No, it's the opposite. So you chose the cello to our delight, and then what happened?
And magic happened. You know, I chose the cello, and it wasn't so easy because they said, "Well, we can't really have you play the cello because we don't have a teacher. We only have a violin teacher." And then, you know, I was advocating for it, and I said, "Well, maybe there's another teacher outside of the kibbutz that I could go." And it was all of
Mm.
a sudden this great opportunity to go to outside. So they did find a teacher, and I went and I never forget that day. My father um, took me in the bus, you know, and we didn't even have a cello. So the kibbutz didn't have a cello, but
How
this,
did you know to select cello then?
well, because my father had those beautiful recordings of Pablo Casals, and he
Oh,
would play for me
the Bach,
the Bach suites, but also some other ones. And so I loved that. I just loved
something of
that.
the sound, huh?
Yeah. And so I knew that I loved that sound. And I loved the fact that
Yeah.
it was big. I was a little girl, and I thought it was so nice to have something that would protect me. um, and, and so I went to that first lesson, and she, you know, the teacher was this girl who kind of was on a community service because, you know, we were very far from the center, from Tel Aviv, 2.5 hours north.
So it was Tel Aviv where you were studying.
No, it was this little city called Afula, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a tiny little city that was the closest city to the kibbutz. Is about 20 minutes.
And you were you were in the Galilee you mentioned,
Yes,
yes?
we were in the
Yes, okay.
Galilee. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So we went there. It was a community center, and she gave me this little toy cello, um, and I started to play. And I remember that she at first she said, "No, you can't use the bow. You just have to use your left hand." And I said, "Okay," but of course, as soon as I got home, I couldn't help but starting to play with the bow. And things, you know, evolved from there very quickly because it really was like magic. It was like I discovered this world that I didn't know existed. And it just made me so happy, you know.
Beautiful.
So I just, you know, passionately practiced and played. And within a year, I started to, you know, I learned Vivaldi concertos and all these kind of things.
How old
And
were you at this point again?
when I started, I was
Good.
8 years old.
Hmm.
And my teacher pretty quickly after, you know, about 6 months said, you know, I really think you should study with another teacher. And, you know, within a year, I started to study with this other teacher, and then moved to the teacher who was sort of the most important teacher in Israel. His name was Uzi Wiesel. He passed away a few years ago. Um, and by the time I was 12, I was discovered by Isaac Stern,
Right.
who used to come to Israel to kind of mentor
Yeah, I know.
kids.
I know.
Yeah. So I was, and then I became, I mean, he very much became my mentor throughout my whole adolescent years, and
Wonderful.
which was really, really a wonderful thing. And it was not easy. The kibbutz, I had to fight a lot to kind of have them allow me to even go to certain things, and
Hmm.
it was difficult. It was difficult to carve my way, but
Understood.
it was a good thing. But I'm telling you all of this because I think that one of the experiences that I had as an artist, and I had so many different kind of, I guess, evolution,
Hmm.
but I discovered that for me it's very important to it's not about resistance. I believe in resistance in a political sense, and you know but I don't it's I think in art it's about um it's about flow. I mean, I guess I like to call it flow, and I think about it a lot. And I think about it a lot now in
Hmm.
the context of everything that happened to us during COVID,
Yes.
which is, it's like putting yourself, like, imagine that you're on a river,
Hmm.
and you're if you're allowing yourself to kind of flow with the river, but then you carve certain ways as you go, and you kind of discover something, and then you kind of take another route, and then you go. So it's not, for me, it was never about negating um, or denouncing, tradition, but it was about not accepting conventions, I
Of course.
guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense, Michael? So,
Oh,
so,
totally.
so all the work that I've done, it was just, I think, is part of this, um, life that I'm trying to lead, which has to do with just allowing myself to be open to whatever it is that is calling for. And so all these things that have to do with whether it's video, whether it's dance, or whether it's so many other things. For me, music is kind of, it's an avenue, and or I don't know, it's a river, that takes you to all these
Understood.
places.
Okay, so I know, no, it's very good. Thank you for the background. It is illuminating. I do want to ask you a question and a thought about. I know you about a year ago. It was at a Jacob's Pillow. You introduced the day
Yes.
with choreographed by Lucinda Childs with Wendy Whalen dancing. And I did see that there was a tour that was planned, but I don't know how much of that was interrupted by the pestilence. Talk briefly about the day, and then also I'd like to hear in using your vision and this flow that you talk about. It's a wonderful metaphor about where are you going out of this.
Yeah.
Once we're out of this, I just learned I'm going to get a vaccine next week. I'm very delighted about it.
Congratulations. That's
Mazel
great.
tov
Yeah.
to
That's
me.
yeah.
But
Um,
it's a matter of age. But for you, the day. Talk briefly about what the day was, but then and will be, but also what's next for you coming out of this experience.
Yeah, so the day was a project that started actually with September 11. It was,
Mm,
it started with this commission. Carnegie Hall commissioned me to do a full
uh,
evening, and one of the composers that I decided to commission as part of this project was David Lang, my dear friend, with whom
Right.
I spent many years in Bangor and Cannes. We started to work on this piece, and September 11 happened. So this piece, which was a piece for multi-track cello and voice as well, I sing in it, and it's really a remarkable piece that David wrote. So that piece became one of the most grounding pieces for me throughout many years that I've performed it a lot. And after several years, about 10 years that I asked David if he would write a companion piece to it so we can create a whole evening. And we decided that David would write a prequel to World to Come. So World to Come, as you probably know, Michael, it's the idea of Haolam Haba, which is the notion of life after death.
There's very little in our tradition about life after death. You know
That's
that.
right.
Very little.
I know. But so this piece is very, it's, it has a metaphor, but the metaphor is that this, the voice tries to separate from the body, which is kind of what, we believe happens after you die, that the soul separates from the body. So and then at the end they reunite in the work. But so the day became this piece about who are all these people? It's like the idea that there were like 2,000 plus people who just disappeared from one moment to the next, and this idea of just holding on to this one memory that that is. It's just one thing that happens that that is worth holding on to, and that might be the one memory that you have just before you die.
I understand.
And it's not trying to be, and so it's from the profound to the mundane. And so there is this text that goes through the whole piece, which was sourced from the internet, actually. So it's all these different people that responded to the question of, I remember the day that. And
well, I was there, by the way.
Oh,
I was downtown when it happened.
Were you? Yeah,
I was right. You were there too. Yeah. I was there in Battery Park.
Oh.
I have to say, and I'm going to be very public on this comment. I don't care. Yeah. I found the John Adams piece based on this to be vulgar, and not to be attentive to the tragedy and the epic tragedy of the day. I thought it was opportunistic and crude in a way that I was very offended by, having lived through the experience.
I'm not familiar with
the transmigration of souls. It's called.
The transmigration of souls.
On the transmigration of souls. Yeah. I am being very public in stating that I am, as you talk about resistance, I'm very resistant to the vulgarity of that piece and the intention.
Yeah.
How does my good colleague David Lang get over that?
Well, first of all, we weren't public about the fact that it's about 9/11. It was kind of a secret, and the piece it was informed by it because we were working on it during that time, right after. But it wasn't meant to be like, oh, this is a piece about 9/11. It was more about this is where we are at this moment. We're both New Yorkers. David lives downtown. I was right there as well. And so this is kind of what comes out of it, us responding to that moment.
Yeah.
It's funny.
That seems very sincere.
Yeah. But I was thinking about, creating a sequel to, this is just kind of a joke, but I remember we were performing the day in Paris. We had exactly a year ago, actually, today. Well, we started, I think, on the 20th of January, 2020.
Right.
We had 14 shows in Paris. It was just really wonderful a year ago.
What theater was that? Do you know?
It was the Théâtre de la Ville in Paris. And I think it was one of the first performances that I went back to the hotel and I opened the news and I heard on CNN that there was some weird thing going on in Wuhan. And, and the next day we were talking about it in the theater, and my sound engineer, David Dave Cook, who is, phenomenal engineer, and he was joking, and he said, this is going to be the end. This is contagion, and we're all gonna, worlds. And we were all joking about it, and nobody really took it seriously. And
I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there you go.
Here we are. All right, so let's step off of that if we can to conclude this very amazing conversation, which has flown. I have to follow up. We understand a little bit about the day, which sounds beautifully organic, and purposeful, and flowing. And I cannot wait to see it and hear it. But now that we've lived through this period, and thank God we're hopefully getting to the other side, what's next for you? What is in that fertile imagination of yours?
It's I don't really know, Michael. So I tell you a little bit about what I went through this whole period. So
yes,
the day was on this worldwide tour. As I said, we were in Paris for we had 14 performances there. We were there for 3 weeks. We came back and then we went to San Francisco. We had 2 shows in San Francisco. Before that, we were at the Kennedy Center. We were here in New York. We had a whole week here at the Joyce Theater. We were at UCLA, Royce Hall. I mean, we've been all over.
Great stuff.
And we were on the road for many more performances. I came back from San Francisco at the end of February, and that was pretty much it. And everything started to get canceled. I had all these, I had a big premiere that was scheduled in Philadelphia at the Annenberg Center. It was a new Michael Gordon piece with the choir, The Crossing, and then we were supposed to be here at Carnegie Hall.
These are all friends. I know Donald Nally quite well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we were supposed to premiere it in Philadelphia and then in Carnegie Hall in March.
I remember the whole, because I was with Donald just the concert before.
So everything got
in February.
Yeah. And my entire season got canceled.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, exactly. But I have to say, for me, I felt quite fortunate that I have a home, I have a family. I can. I'm not in the street like some of my musician friends.
Terrible stuff.
So I kind of just felt a call to, to just be as helpful as I can to my friends and to all the people that I knew that were having a lot of issues. And I didn't really feel terribly sorry about, I can't perform anymore. And in a strange way, again, and I think that comes back to the idea of flow, of how we kind of need to, I think, not accept where we are, but go with where it is and sort of move.
Maya, let me ask you something. When it first hit, I got sick right away, but I spoke to Jimmy Galway and to Yvonne Fisher, by the way, on this program.
Yeah.
And they were not the only 2 who mentioned this to me, but they had a period of what they called lethargy, where they could not do anything, where they were so struck down emotionally by what was going on. And the fact that they had been in this life for decades of constant motion and study and motion and study and motion and study, that finally, boom, curtain comes down, no movement. You're saying you did not feel this lethargy, did you?
I did feel it was hard. I didn't touch the cello for a while. That I can tell you. So yes, there was this sense of, okay, you're here, you're surrounding me, but I'm not really.
Gabriela Montero, Simona Dinnerstein did not touch it for weeks.
Yeah, so I did.
What is that telling you? I've just mentioned these 4 wonderful musicians who are friends of ours, and this is true of many others. What is it in us? For my final talk to you about this today, what is it in us, this life force, that at least for a brief period of time was pushed down? What happened?
You know, I think that we just get very, I think that there are several things. First of all,
Yeah,
I think that, which is why I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, because I think we tend, humans, but I think it's true in nature also, we tend to go into some sort of, inertia. And
hibernation.
well, but also we're on some sort of path, right?
Hmm.
And we start believing that this is the only path that
Yeah,
exists.
I
And
know.
so we put everything in it, and then when it stops, it's a shock. There's a certain shock. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
so used to travel. I'm spent half of my year on the road, which is something that I cherished and loved, and all of a sudden I'm here in this house for almost a year now, it's a very strange thing. And I
it is.
realized that, I haven't actually spent that amount of time with my life partner, and my dog, for that. So it's a very, yeah. So I think that, I don't think that it says much about the artistic instincts. I just think that there's certain events in life that are just so big and momentous, where the entire kind of humanity is sort of on pause in a way,
Hmm.
right? So that it takes us a while to adjust and to sort of find our bearings.
So I know that after the initial lethargy, in my case, grave sickness and recovery, I then had an explosion of creativity. I withheld something and then boom, out it came.
Yeah.
So I know, based on what you have done all these years, a lot of it very visible to see and hear online, and hopefully, God willing, as we say in Ivrit, Baruch Hashem,
Yeah.
that we will come to a time soon that we can hear the artistry of Maya Beiser live, where it is intended to be.
Yeah.
Partially, it's also intended to be in video as well.
Yeah.
So Maya, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
It's wonderful that Maya Beiser, greatest cellist, is with us today, who means so much to so many of us who are creating music every day. So
Thank
Maya
you.
Beiser, be well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. You be well as well.
Thank you. This is Michael Shapiro for Interplay, your host, Conversations in Music. Thank you for joining us.